All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me once again to hear a couple of stories this afternoon. I thought that today I would tell a couple of stories about being a librarian. I have been a librarian in the past. I've worked in public and school libraries, and now I actually train school librarians. And I thought especially with all the things that are going on right now, I wanted to honor librarians. They're a group of people who are still, many of them working very hard right now. I know I appreciate my librarians here at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I'm still able to request materials and then go and pick them up from the library. And I know librarians who have been who stuffed absentee ballots to mail out to people. I know librarians who are helping make sure that people get food during this time. And then, of course, the school librarians are still very busy helping make sure that the students have activities, have educational opportunities. And a lot of school librarians are doing so much technology training with teachers, helping to make sure that the teachers at their school know how to use various technologies to help them interact with their students right now. So librarians are doing a ton for us right now during the pandemic, even if you're not always seeing what they're doing. So I wanted to tell a couple stories about my experiences as a librarian. This first one is from my very first library job in a public library. When the other members of the children's department and I found out that Carmen was going to be our shelver, our first thought was, oh no, not Carmen. Carmen was infamous around the public library as that moody teenager who wouldn't look at you or talk to you if you crossed paths in the break room. There was also some gossip that maybe she was like a teenage delinquent. Her mom was one of the police officers who was often stationed at the library, and the rumor was that Carmen's mom had gotten Carmen the job so that she could keep an eye on her. Now, when I first started working at the public library, the shelvers weren't assigned to particular departments. They would go into the back room of the circulation department, get a cart of books. All the books in that cart would go to one department. It might be children's, young adults, adult reference, the genealogy collection. They'd go to that department, shelve all the books, go back to circulation, get another cart of books, and that cart might go to a totally different part of the library. But just recently, the administration had decided that each shelver was going to be permanently assigned to a section of the library, and they would only shelve in that section from then on. This turned out to be a problem for the children's department. Nobody wanted to be permanently assigned to children's. Now, a big part of this was because the shelves in the children's department were about half the height of the shelves in the rest of the library. So shelving in children's involved a lot of bending over to put the books on the shelves. And for our older shelvers, that was really uncomfortable. The other part of the reason that people didn't like shelving in children's was because children's books are thinner, so more of them fit on a cart, and it takes a lot longer to shelve a cart of children's books. The first shelver who was assigned to children's quit after one day. Then they assigned us Carmen. And yeah, our first thought was, oh no, not Carmen. But our second thought was, Carmen is a teenager. So that whole bending over to shelve thing, that shouldn't bother her like it bothers our older shelvers. So all four of us who worked in the children's department, we got together and we decided that we were going to be really nice to Carmen because we wanted her to stay. Now, as a teenager, a high school student, Carmen only worked evenings and weekends. So that first afternoon when Carmen showed up at the library after school, those of us who were sitting behind the children's desk, we smiled and waved at her, "Hi, Carmen!" And she kind of looked at us out of the corner of her eye. But we kept at it. The next afternoon, "Hi, Carmen!" And she kind of looked at us and maybe cracked a little bit of a smile. By the end of the week, we had Carmen stopping at the children's desk to chat with us just for a minute before she started shelving her books. We would tell her about the funny things that had happened in preschool story time that morning, and she would tell us about her high school dramas. And it turned out that Carmen was not a teenage delinquent. She wasn't even a moody teenager. She was just a normal, good kid. We figured that when she was working all over the library, she just didn't feel like she belonged anywhere. She hadn't really gotten to know anybody. But after she got assigned to the children's department, she became part of our family. We all got to know each other. Well, there was this one weekend. It was my weekend to work. I would be the only one on the children's desk all weekend, and Carmen was going to come in since she only worked nights and weekends. And it was pretty much the same story all over the library. There was one staff member in each department and maybe a couple of people shelving. And that was it. Weekends were pretty quiet. Saturday went fine. Sunday morning, I woke up. I didn't feel 100%, but I rolled into work. I was sitting there at the children's desk. Carmen finished shelving her first cart of books, and then she came by and she said, "You don't look so good." I said, "No, Carmen, I don't feel so good. I kind of feel like I might throw up." And as soon as I said it, I knew that I definitely was going to throw up. I went running for the staff bathroom, did what I needed to do, cleaned myself up. I came back out to the desk and Carmen said, "You need to go home. I'm going to sit at the desk for you. You go back in the workroom, make some phone calls, see if someone else can come fill in for you." So I did what she said. I went back in the workroom, and so the normal protocol would be for me to call my supervisor, the children's librarian, and then she would find somebody else to cover the rest of Sunday. But the children's librarian was out of town that weekend, and she had told me that if I needed anything, to call her supervisor, the assistant director of the library. The assistant director was in charge of the entire first floor, children's, young adult, and circulation. So I called up the assistant director and I told her, "Listen, I'm sick. I need to go home. Can you help find someone to cover for me?" And she said, "Well, just ask around at the library, see if one of the other departments can spare somebody." And we did. We would cover for each other like this sometimes, but not on the weekend. There was only one person in each department. And I told her, there aren't any extra people here. There's no one else at the library right now who can cover for me. And she said, "Well, I don't know what to tell you. I guess you're on your own." And she hung up the phone. I just kind of laid my head down on the desk in the workroom for a minute, and then Carmen came to check on me. She said, "What's going on? Are you going home?" And I said, "No, Carmen, there's no one coming for me. I'm going to come back out. I'll sit at the desk, and I think if I just sit really still, that I'll be okay for the rest of the day." Carmen said, "No, you're not doing that." She said, "Listen, it's really slow today. I think I can shelve these books and keep an eye on the desk at the same time. I'll cover for you. You go home." Well, I didn't argue with her. I just clocked out and I left. The next week, when I was telling the children's librarian about what had happened over the weekend, she was furious to hear how the assistant director had treated me. She said if she couldn't find someone to cover for you, she should have come in. That's what you do when you're a manager. But we all were so impressed with Carmen, who had shown more compassion and resourcefulness than the grown woman who helped run the library. Carmen graduated from high school that spring. She was with us through most of the summer reading program, but then toward the end of the summer, she did give her 2 weeks notice because she was going off to college. On Carmen's last day, the children's librarian told the assistant director that she needed to come down and sit at the children's desk Well, our entire department took Carmen out to lunch. We had to give her a proper send-off. She was part of our children's department family. The end. So that's my story about Carmen. I think sometimes teenagers are underestimated, and I love this kind of warm and fuzzy story about what a great kid Carmen actually was, and how we were kind of terrible for gossiping about her and thinking she was a moody teenager before that. And she was a great person to work with, and I'll be forever grateful that she covered for me that day when I was really sick. Whew. All right, so my next story takes place actually not too long after the first one. I left my job at the public library after my husband John and I got married. We moved to England, where he was studying abroad, and I volunteered with a library while we were there. So while we were living in England, I volunteered with the 2nd Air Division Memorial Library. And this library was a living memorial, still is, a living memorial for Americans who were stationed in Norwich, England during World War II. The Memorial Library is housed within the larger main branch for the Norwich City and Norfolk County Library System. And the Memorial Library, their collection consists of materials having to do with World War II, especially local World War II history and American culture. So it was actually a pretty good place to volunteer as an American librarian. One of the first things that I did for them was that I created a collection of about 30 American children's picture books, because they wanted to do more programs for children. And then after that, I started doing programs for them. Now, because they were plugged in to this larger county system, I did programs all over the county. They would send me out to different locations. So one of the first programs that I did was actually at the Long Stratton Public Library. I took the bus over to Long Stratton, and the Long Stratton Library was celebrating World Book Day. The theme that year was Books Can Take You Anywhere. They were having some classes walk over from the local public school to see me. So, and I was doing a program kind of relating to American culture and American books. So I got there a little bit early. The librarians gave me a tour of the library. Had a beautiful layout. I especially liked the children's area, and they had this brilliant design feature. There was this little gate that you could actually close to corral the children in the children's area. Well, then the first class walked over. It was a class of third graders, third-year students from the local primary school. They walked over with their teacher, met me in the children's area, and the librarians did close that gate, so we were all corralled in there. I read 3 picture books, did some songs and rhymes, we talked a little bit, and then at the end of the program they had some free time where they could do World Book Day coloring sheets, they could explore the children's area, they could talk more with me one-on-one if they wanted to. Then when we were finished, that class walked back to the school. A second class of third-year students walked over. I did the same program with them. After they left, I had a break for lunch. So I walked down the street and got a sandwich. I came back. I was eating with the librarians in their break room when one of the librarians said, you know, that third group that we're having after lunch, they're going to be the hardest. And one of the other librarians said, oh no, she's just joking. Her grandson's in that class. So after lunch, that last class of third-year students walked over and met me in the children's area. I read the books and did the songs and rhymes and talked to them a little bit, and then they had that free time at the end to do the coloring sheets and look at books and talk to me. I was sitting on the floor with a great big atlas. I had a few kids around me. When over from the corner of the room, there was this telltale giggling. Now, as you heard, my previous work had mostly been with preschool children. I was not experienced enough with elementary school children yet to know what that giggling meant. But the teacher knew. She went marching over there, and this one enterprising young man, not the librarian's grandson, this one young man had discovered the fatal flaw with the layout of the Long Stratton Library children's area. That was that the parenting books were kept in the children's area. And if you look through parenting books, it is possible to find pictures of bare breasts. Now, these are books that have to do with breastfeeding and childbirth, so they're not sexy pictures. But I suppose when you're a third-year boy, bare breasts are bare breasts. Well, the teacher got all embarrassed and red in the face, and the little boy got all embarrassed and red in the face. She bawled him out and told him never to be seen looking at such things again. And then the moment passed. We finished up, and the class went back to their school. A few weeks later, the Memorial Library asked me to do another program. This time it was actually going to be in Norwich at the Memorial Library, and it was part of a larger program. So for this one, 3 classes of third-year students were walking over from the local public school all together, and they were going to be at 3 different stations. I would have one group with me in the Memorial Library, one group would be in the children's section of the Norwich Library, and then the third group was going to get a behind-the-scenes tour of the public library. And then they would rotate until all 3 groups had seen all 3 stations. Now this time, the Memorial Library wanted me to do a program having to do with Americans in World War II. So I started out in this little conference room that was off the back of the Memorial Library, and I had some slides, very picture heavy. I started out talking about some of my experiences as an American living in Norwich, and then I related those to experiences that the Americans who were stationed in Norwich during World War II actually had. And there were a lot of similarities having to deal with differences in food, differences in the way people talk, driving on the opposite side of the road and actually riding a bike a lot more than driving a car. So I talked about some of those things, and then I shifted into talking about World War II airplanes. There were lots of great pictures from the Memorial Library collection. And we finished up by making paper airplanes. We had found out that at the local public school, the children, the third-year students, had been learning how to follow a set of directions. So I put up on the screen a set of simple directions for making a paper airplane, and everyone got a sheet of paper. They made their paper airplanes, and then we flew them down this hallway at the back of the Memorial Library. And that was it. Then we rotated, and I did the same program with the second group, and then we rotated again. And with the third group, I did the talk, and we made the paper airplanes, and we flew the paper airplanes down the hallway. We tried not to, run them into any veterans who were in the library doing research. And we were done, but the other 2 groups weren't. By the end of the day, things had started running a little bit behind schedule, and they were not ready to meet back up with us yet. Now, this time I didn't have any teachers with me, it was just me, and I had to figure out how to entertain these kids for an indefinite amount of time. They had just been flying paper airplanes, so I could not stick them back in that conference room and talk at them. I looked around, and the Memorial Library is a very interesting place. So I had them gather up, and I said, listen, let's just use this extra time to look around at the stuff in the Memorial Library. There are display cases of memorabilia. There are all the books. You can chat with me. And this was going pretty well. There were kids gathered around display cases. There were kids looking at books. There were kids talking to me. And then from a corner of the room, I heard that telltale giggling. And this time, I knew what it meant. And also this time, I had to deal with it by myself. I headed in the direction of the giggling. Now, in the defense of these children, they had not gone looking for this book. It was a book that was up on display on top of one of the shelves. and it was a book of 1960s American bathing suits. So the lady on the cover was not nude. She was wearing a bathing suit. It just didn't leave a lot to the imagination. And as I approached, I heard the kids who were gathered around the book debating about whether or not the individual on the cover was actually a woman. And my curiosity got the better of me, so instead of immediately telling them to find something else to do, I asked them, why do you think that maybe isn't a woman? Well, the bravest young man said, she hasn't got any, Yes, well, during the time that I was living in England, I read in a magazine that the average cup size of British women used to be somewhere in the A range, and now it is somewhere in the D range. And this is not due to natural selection, it is due to artificial enhancement. And I thought, these poor children have seen so many fake breasts. They don't know what natural breasts look like. So I told them that I had it on good authority that you could look like that and be a woman. And then I suggested they find something else to do. A few weeks later, I was scheduled to do another program for the Memorial Library. This time I was going to do the program in a school. And I'll admit that as I was preparing, I did think to myself, during my last two programs, there were breast incidents. But there is not going to be a breast incident at this next program because I will be in a school instead of in a library. As a librarian, I hate to imply that libraries are inherently subversive places. But the fact remains that in the libraries, kids had found books that their teachers and the librarians and I had not counted on them finding. But in a classroom, surely there would not be anything that the teacher wouldn't want the kids to see. So I made my way on the train over to this public school in Durham. I got there a little bit early. I went to the classroom where I was going to be doing my first presentation. And I was just chatting with the teacher as the students were coming in and doing their morning work. Now, these students, like all of the public school students that I saw while I was living in England, they were wearing uniforms. So they all had the same blazers, the same button-up dress shirts. All the girls were wearing the same skirts. The boys were wearing the same trousers. And then one of the little boys, he came in, he walked right over to the teacher, pulled up his trouser leg, and he said, "Hey, look at my socks." So the teacher and I both looked down at his socks, and there, knitted into his sock, was a little lady in a bikini. And the teacher, a male teacher, said, "Those are nice socks. Where did you get them?" And the boy said, "They're my dad's. He let me borrow them." And I realized then that it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't even really matter the age of the boys involved. There is always the possibility of a breast incident. The end. All right, thank you so much for listening to my stories about being a librarian. And I'll see you next time. Have a great evening.